Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Reimer from the Montana State Library, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon on digital equity and libraries. And as far as a few housekeeping things, as far as Zoom etiquette, you can go ahead and rename yourselves if you would like. As far as audio goes, I'm muting everyone, and I'd like you to remain muted unless you're speaking so that we can avoid background noise. Like, you may hear my dog popping up at any particular point in time. And that just makes for a better recording experience for everybody. If you don't have a microphone and you'd like to participate and ask questions, you can always call in on the phone. There was a phone number included in your Zoom invitation. And it's great to have your smiling faces along with it, but if you prefer not to have your face in there, you can turn your video off by clicking the stop video in the lower left-hand corner. Please use the chat if you want to add your comments or questions. I think we're going to leave the questions until the end because we have a number of presenters and I'd like to get through everyone's presentations before we get to questions. But if you want to go ahead and add them in the meantime, you can put them in chat or you can wait and ask them via microphone when we get to that point. And if you don't see a chat icon, it may be under more as well. You click on that and you'll see chat as one of your options. And then there are some view options. We're screen sharing now, and if you want to be able to see it better, you can play around with your Zoom ratio a little bit. And then feel free to use the reactions button if you want to raise your hand or use any other emojis to express yourself. On today's webinar, I introduced myself. I'm a statewide consulting librarian with the Montana State Library. We're going to have Jenny Stapp as our first speaker, speaking on state library digital equity initiatives. And I'm sure most of you already know Jenny as a state librarian here in Montana. Then we're going to have a national overview on the Digital Equity Act from Katarina Smiley and Brett Litzler. They're with NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. I looked that up to make sure I got that right. And representing the State Broadband Office and the Digital Equity Plan will be Anthony Curcio, who's with Summit. And then after we get through all of those and your head is filled with information, we're going to give you a chance to ask some questions and then wrap it up from there. So take it away, Jenny.
Great. Hi, everyone. To share my screen here really quick. All right. Everybody see my screen okay? Like Suzanne said, I wanted to start by giving you an overview of the work that the State Library has done with Montana libraries over the years to support digital equity. One of my concerns as we start talking about digital equity is that it might seem like this is something new. It might seem like it's just one more thing added to the plate of our already overtaxed libraries, when in fact, Montana libraries have been doing digital equity work since the mid-1990s at the latest. This is really part and parcel of what it means to be a modern 21st century library. And as we've been talking about over the last many weeks, this is really a once in a generation opportunity for us to extend digital access and digital equity to Montanans. And Montana libraries have a critical role to play in supporting digital equity. So I wanted to spend just a few minutes giving you some history and context for the rest of the information that we're going to be providing in this webinar, and then to really encourage all of you to be involved in the process of helping to inform how Montana can use the federal funding that's going to be coming to our state to help support digital equity in the future. So just quickly, what is digital equity? And we'll probably get into this a little bit more later in the webinar. But according to the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, digital equity is a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. And there are many reasons why people don't have digital equity, why there is such a digital divide in Montana, whether it's actual physical access to internet services, whether it's the computer technology in their homes, whether it's the ability to afford those kinds of services, whether it's the knowledge, skills, and abilities to apply their knowledge to using the internet in their lives. These are all barriers that cause digital inequity in our state. And those are all ways and reasons why Montana libraries have been so involved in supporting digital equity over the years. I'm going to give you sort of a timeline and history of the work that Montana State Library and Montana libraries have been involved in, going back to about 1996 on up to the present, again, to give you that history and context for the work that we're talking about today. So in 1996, Congress passed the Telecommunications Act, and in part that allowed for increased investment in the internet itself. The Federal Communications Commission established E-rate funds and the requirements to go along with those E-rate funds. Many of you are familiar with the process of applying for those dollars that can help offset the cost of providing internet access. One of those requirements at the time was that libraries had to create technology plans, and those plans had to be approved by the state library. That's a requirement that went away many years ago. We no longer have that requirement now. But at that time, it was really important for libraries to be thinking about what kinds of technology services they wanted to offer and what resources were necessary in order to implement those plans. And then really back in the mid-90s was the first time the state library helped libraries to submit E-rate applications to help supplement the cost of those internet services. And that's something that we still try to strive for today. In August of 1996, the Montana State Library entered into a contract with Infomine of the Rockies. That contract was a 2-year contract to provide internet services for 27 libraries in Montana, and it totaled $46,000. And I included just a little screen capture from the state library's first website that we launched back in 1996, classic 1990s era website. Montana State Library was one of the first state agencies in Montana to go online. In April of 1997, the Montana State Library Commission made their first major investment in supporting internet access and digital equity through Montana libraries when they allocated over $345,000 of our 1998 Library Services and Technology Act funding to help connect 51 libraries. And then that year, we also hired the first of our 2 technology consultants to assist libraries with their technology plans and with deploying networked technology in those libraries. And Suzanne Reimer, who's hosting this webinar, was hired in 1999, one of our very early consultants and has been working with us now for many, many years. Jumping ahead to 2009, 2010, the state library received about $4 million of American Recovery and Reinvestment Act dollars through the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program. We used those dollars to update public access computers in libraries. We continued to support E-rate applications to supplement the cost of internet. We provided extensive digital literacy training programs through public computing centers in your local public libraries. We used those dollars to create technology petting zoos. Many of you will recall that it was around that time that e-readers and other kinds of mobile devices were really hitting the marketplace, and libraries were inundated with information requests from people wanting to know how they could make better use of that kind of technology. And the technology petting zoos allowed us to put test or sample technology in libraries that gave librarians the ability to play with that technology to give them the confidence to help better support their patrons. Through those computing centers, over the 18-month span of this grant program, 62,000 Montanans participated in technology training at their libraries. That was a really important time for the state library to be partnering with a wide variety of different kinds of stakeholders who were pushing their services through the internet and making sure that libraries then were good partners in helping your local communities partner with those organizations to take advantage of those kinds of service offerings. Examples of partners that we worked with at the time were the Montana Digital Academy, AARP, and other kinds of state agencies who were really making use of the internet to deploy services to Montanans. Unfortunately, when that grant funding ended in about 2012, our support for those kinds of services went away. So that was really the last time the state library had any significant funding to invest in digital literacy, to invest in any kinds of technology upgrades until the COVID funding that I'll talk about in just a little bit. In 2015, the FCC issued an E-rate modernization order that established internet guidelines for public libraries. And those guidelines state that libraries serving fewer than 50,000 people should have broadband speeds of at least 100 megabits per second. So that's the minimum, 100 megabits per second. And libraries serving 50,000 people or more should have broadband speeds of at least 1 gigabit per second. And I've included a summary of that order in these materials. We at the State Library were interested in understanding how Montana libraries stacked up to these guidelines. So in 2019, we funded a study of broadband access in public libraries. The study identified broadband speeds in those libraries. It helped us to prioritize needs for hardware upgrades to improve broadband speeds in libraries. And it identified the fact that in 2020, the library was the only source of free Wi-Fi in 28 Montana communities where there are libraries. So about 25% of Montana libraries at that time were the only source of free Wi-Fi in their communities. You might ask why 100 megabits per second is recommended as the minimum for libraries. And it's really that kind of internet speed that allows for the multiple simultaneous internet users to really fully participate synchronously online. And what we're hearing from libraries who haven't invested in those kinds of speeds and finally make that investment is that it's a game changer for their patrons who are coming in and finally experiencing what internet speeds at that level can really offer to them. Moving on to some of the programs that we've supported with some of our COVID-related funding. In 2019, 2020, early 2020, we were exploring the opportunity of piloting the use of mobile Wi-Fi hotspots that rely on cellular services when the pandemic hit. We wanted to know what the use and need might be for having the ability for people to make use of those hotspots. And when the pandemic hit, we realized very quickly that we needed to move from a small test pilot to a statewide hotspot lending program. So we have invested close to $1 million or so, just shy of $1 million in this hotspot lending program over the last 2.5 years. And we have funding to continue it through June of 2023 at this point. At this time, we have nearly 1,000 hotspots circulating around the state. The Montana State Library owns those hotspots, and they're available through public school and academic libraries. And libraries are lending them based on their own circulation requirements. We rely on state of Montana term contracts with Verizon and T-Mobile. And then we also have an agreement with the internet service provider Nemont up in northeastern Montana. They've been a very generous partner in helping us to provide some matching costs to make their service more affordable for us. We're spending about $40,000 a month on the devices and unlimited data plans for those mobile Wi-Fi hotspots. As I said, those are funded through our Library Services and Technology Act funds, through CARES Act dollars that we received initially in the pandemic, and then the ARPA dollars that have been made available most recently. And as I said, we have funding through this fiscal year. To date, Montanans have used more than 1.1 million gigabits of data through these hotspots. And I included just a fantastic quote from one of those users. We do have a voluntary survey that we have available to users of those hotspots to better understand why people are using the hotspots. And it really gets to some of the barriers that I think are important for us to be thinking about when we think about barriers to digital equity. And some of the reasons people are checking them out is the cost of the internet, not being able to afford internet services in their homes, lack of internet service to their homes, lack of technology, computers and other kinds of technology that would otherwise allow them to take advantage of the internet, but they have a phone, for example, that allows them to get online with a hotspot. And then just sufficient capacity within their homes. We're hearing from people who have people working in the homes. At the same time, children are trying to learn online or do homework online, and they just don't have sufficient capacity, even though they have some capacity. And we know that people are using these hotspots to go to school, to do homework, to apply for jobs, to apply for government services, all the kinds of things that you would expect people to be using the internet for, they're using those hotspots for in their homes. And then we do have a dashboard if anybody's interested in more up-to-date data about the usage of the hotspots. And then in addition to the hotspots themselves, we also use some of our federal COVID-related funding to procure laptops and tablets that libraries are also checking out to patrons who might need that kind of technology in their homes. We're also using some of our ARPA dollars to address some of those technology barriers that were identified in the study that we conducted in 2019. So we're able to upgrade the internal wiring in between 25 and 30 of Montana's 116 libraries. that study found that 40% of libraries have outdated wiring and Wi-Fi equipment. And so we're able to at least make a start in improving the internal wiring in those libraries, so that as those libraries get improved access to internet services to the door, they have the technology capacity in the buildings to take advantage of those internet connections. And then with a better managed Wi-Fi environment, library staff have more information that will allow them to better manage those wide area networks in their libraries. In response to our investment in their libraries, we are asking those libraries to make sure that they are upgrading their internet service speeds to that 100 megabits per second minimum, as is the guideline coming out of the FCC E-rate modernization orders. And that work to invest in these libraries should conclude at the end of November. So one of the things that I would love to see coming out of some of the broadband dollars that are going to come to Montana is more funding that would allow us to address those libraries that we didn't have the funding to address with our ARPA dollars. So just to kind of wrap up and give us, like I said, a little bit of context for where we're going. 100 megabits per second in libraries is especially important in Montana because Montana continues to rank dead last for all states in broadband speeds available to Montanans. 28% of Montanans do not have access to at least 100 megabits per second broadband. Montana libraries have delivered 944,000 Wi-Fi sessions in 2019. 2019, of course, being the last year where we had the best available data about library computer uses. Montana libraries currently offer 938 public access computers. That's a great number, but I know that there are still libraries out there that are using computer equipment that is 10 and 12 years old that was last replaced when we had VTOP dollars to replace them. In 2019, Montanans used library computers 828,000 times. We ranked 13th in the country for computer use in libraries nationally. And astoundingly, last year, Montana libraries offered nearly 46,000 one-on-one technology assistance sessions. So as I said, this work is part and parcel to the work that is going on in Montana libraries. This isn't new. We know we have needs, and this is really an opportunity for us to communicate to the state of Montana the role that libraries play, what our needs are in trying to better address the digital equity concerns that Montanans face, so that libraries can continue to be organizations within our communities that help bridge that digital divide and can help Montanans best achieve digital equity. I'm really excited to have other colleagues on this webinar. I'm going to turn it over to Brett, and then we'll go forward from there. I'm happy to be available for questions at the end.
And we have Brett and Katerina on. And so if you'd like to introduce yourselves, and you can go ahead and take it away. It's your next on the agenda.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jenny. Thanks so much, Suzanne. Yeah, my name is Brett Litzler. I'm a broadband program specialist for NTIA, and I'm a member of the digital equity team. And I'm joined today by Katerina Smiley. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Kat.
Sure thing. Thank you, Brett. My name is Katerina Smiley. You all may refer to me as Kat as well. That's perfectly fine. I am also a broadband program specialist with the DE team with Brett and our other colleagues.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you all can see it. And we have a slideshow here to go through the Digital Equity Act programs, as well as some other programs at NTIA. So to start things off, I'm going to give some background info on the Digital Equity Act, as well as some context into the rest of the broadband funding that was allocated by the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the bipartisan infrastructure law, as I'm sure many of you know, it allocated $65 billion to fund high-speed internet programs across the country. The bulk of the money, $48 billion, will be administered by us, NTIA, with $14.2 billion going to the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, and the rest of the money going to the Rural Utilities Service through the USDA, as well as some other funding initiatives. So within NTIA, we have the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, which is a $42 billion program to build infrastructure across the country, as well as support equity initiatives. We also have the Middle Mile Grant Program, which is a $1 billion competitive grant program, which will expand middle mile infrastructure. And then we have $2 billion additionally provided to the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, which was an existing program that was provided more funding. But mainly today, we're going to focus on, of course, the Digital Equity Act programs, which will provide $2.75 billion to promote digital equity and inclusion initiatives across the country. So this $2.75 billion program is broken up into 3 separate programs: the State Planning Grant Program, the State Capacity Grant Program, and a third competitive grant program. As you can see by the timeline down at the bottom, the state planning grant deadline has passed, and every state and territory has submitted an application. Next, we're going to be entering the planning phase, whereby the states will develop a state digital equity plan and then submit their plans to gain access to the $1.44 billion for the capacity grant. States will then allocate this money to subgrantees, which will use the money to address the needs of covered populations defined in the statute. And the covered populations are listed here. I'm sure that it's no surprise to all of you, but a lot of individuals, particularly people impacted by the digital divide, may fall under more than one of these categories. Certainly, there are rural inhabitants that are also could be considered aging or low income. Veterans, all of these sort of overlap with each other. And in the same way, we're requiring that states use this money to address all of the covered populations, particularly through programs that address multiple of the covered populations at the same time. Of course, libraries being one of these types of entities and types of programs. So now I'm going to hand it over to Katarina, who will provide a little bit more detail on the state digital equity plans, as well as how you all can get involved in the process here in Montana.
Thank you, Brett. Okay, so just to really summarize what Brett was saying earlier, the foundation of this program really is to promote digital inclusion activities that collectively build to advance and ensure digital equity. I know traditionally that has been interpreted to ensure that everyone has affordable, reliable access to high-speed internet. And yes, that is a very key component. But as you all know, digital equity extends far beyond that. And it also encompasses the provision of devices, skills training, and technical assistance to folks in order for them to fully participate in this ever-expanding digital economy, society, and democracy. So what does it look like in practice when states are developing their digital equity plans? So here we've outlined several components that are required for the development of the state digital equity plan. First, we're going to start with our vision statement. And essentially, this will help to outline the big picture goals pertaining to digital equity. It's essential to note here that each vision statement, much like the rest of the other components, is going to vary from state to state, region to region. The key thing here is to think critically and even creatively about what digital equity looks like within your state. What are those necessary conditions in which individuals and communities have the information technology capacity that's needed to fully participate, as described in the NOFO? And it's very important here that this statement is crafted with those covered populations in mind. Next, we're going to move on to objectives. Here, states should describe how their plan will align with existing efforts across economic and workforce development goals, plans, and outcomes. This will also be inclusive of educational outcomes, health outcomes, civic and social engagement, as well as delivery of essential services. This may also look like looking at ways to measure and improve online accessibility of public resources, looking at digital literacy programs, as well as matters pertaining to privacy and cybersecurity, which is super important to keep in mind, especially when engaging with marginalized communities. Next, we're going to look at barriers to digital equity. And it's important for states to really look at those local coordination and organization efforts who are boots on the ground serving our covered populations. And it's important to make sure that they are present at the planning table. Moving on to outreach and engagement. Here, states will be required to provide a description on how they plan to collaborate with key stakeholders to achieve its digital equity goals. And we'll take a look momentarily on who is considered a key stakeholder. But essentially, this is going to require a list of organizations that help to collaborate and inform their digital equity plans. I cannot stress enough that this will not be a one-time check the box occurrence. NTIA is really stressing meaningful stakeholder engagement that is continuous throughout the planning process. So whenever we talk about equity, we are essentially talking about people and how to improve the conditions of their lives. So although engagement is not always easy, it is very necessary and very worthwhile. Looking at the integration section, here states will conduct a asset inventory of current resources, programs, as well as strategies. This will help to inform what are some of those best practices that can be adopted to ensure a thorough and robust DE plan. Here we also require a description on how states will incorporate local DE plans, including those from tribal entities as well. Lastly, in this section, states will describe how coordination efforts for their DE plan tie into those for their BEAD plan as well. And though they are two separate programs, equity is at the heart of them both. And we want to make sure that that is essentially the needle and thread that's connecting everything together. Lastly, we will look at our implementation section, and it's fairly straightforward. Just again, looking at those strategies and best practices to implement while rolling out those DE plans and including a timeline in which this is expected to be completed. Next slide, please. Awesome. So here we're going to look at some of the key stakeholders states are required to engage with when developing their digital equity plans. And I just want to pause for a moment and say trust is really the key word here. We know oftentimes folks, especially within those covered populations that we've identified, may be distrustful of anything the government at the local, state, or federal level may be involved in for a broad range of reasons. So it's very important that states partner with these key stakeholder groups, not only to ensure community buy-in, but again, looking at their plans and ensuring that they are being informed by folks who are boots on the ground, serving folks at the intersections of those covered populations day in and day out in order to promote equity. So here we're looking at a couple of stakeholder groups. You know, of course, we have those community anchored institutions, and we can look at how that's described in the NOFO. We also have local educational agencies, and that can be inclusive of a variety of entities, such as your HBCUs, your MSIs, etc. We also would like to see some collaboration from folks from nonprofits as well. perhaps those that have a digital navigator program. And shout out to the libraries and librarians, because those are the folks who are the original digital navigators. The real ones know. It's also important to look at entities that carry out workforce development programs, as well as public housing authorities. So again, just to reiterate, everyone has a role in this, which is important when achieving digital equity. Oh, yes, thank you for that definition. Sometimes we get lost in the alphabet soup here. Okay, next slide, please. So again, taking a look at how each stakeholder plays a key role in the digital equity programs. I just want to state here that many hands make light work. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but rather a brief map on the many crossroads states will encounter while in pursuit of this destination of digital equity. So this is inclusive of a variety of folks, right? So we have our telecom providers, our ISPs. We got to make sure folks have access to the internet. If we don't start there, then what are we doing? We also need to make sure that we are engaging with our tribal governments as well, making sure that a collaboration is taking place between community anchor institutions and those community organizations that I mentioned earlier. It's also important to coordinate with local government, right? Because they will be the ones to help inform states on the local needs pertaining to digital equity. And last but certainly not least, we need individuals who are simply committed to doing the work and who are going to serve as those sort of bridge builders between states, these organizations, and the people that we are trying to serve. I know that that was a lot of information sort of thrown at you, and I want to be cognizant of the time. So if you have any further questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to visit the internetforall.gov website for additional information on all of our federal funding programs. For more information, you also can engage with your state or territory regarding their plans to improve high-speed internet access, as well as their goals surrounding digital equity. NTIA is always here to take any comments, questions, or concerns you have regarding any of our programs. We ask that you would kindly submit them to digitalequity@ntia.gov. Last but not least, be sure to check out our website again to stay up to date on the newest webinars. We have some recorded from previous sessions as well, so you can feel free to check those out. And we also will have webinars including program-specific application guidance for eligible applicants. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the next person. To keep this going. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Brett and Kat. And now, last but not least, we have Anthony Curcio.
Good afternoon. Boy, this is a tough act to follow. I love the lion, by the way. So what we've just heard from our officials at NTIA is how important outreach and stakeholder engagement is. And that's what I'm here to tell you about, is Montana's specific plan for stakeholder engagement and outreach. I hope it measures up, Kat. That was that's a tough act to follow. So let me figure out how to share my screen here, which shouldn't take me very long. I hope that you can see my PowerPoint, which says Montana Broadband Digital Equity. Okay, great. So given the what's already been said, I don't think that I can say better what Brett and Kat just said. So I'm going to go quickly through a couple of slides here up front, which essentially repeat what they said and really get to the meat of my presentation, which is describing to you how the state of Montana and it's being executed to the Department of Administration at the state level. Well, that's where the outreach and stakeholder engagement is being led from, are pursuing it. So I think we already know, but there are a lot of different data sources, but it's widely accepted that about a quarter of our residents don't have a subscription, of an internet subscription of any and it's not that, it's not only, as we all know, because there isn't access, there are other barriers to entry. There's affordability is a problem. We also know that about 80% of our residents in Montana do not have access to fiber optic service, and about 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 7 cannot get internet speeds of at least 25.3. And we also know that about almost a third don't have speeds of 100 down. Now, when we look at the barriers, as we've all been discussing on this webinar so far, it's not only access, it's affordability, it's literacy, it's access to devices. Some of the equity assets that we've been hearing about from the libraries and others have been speaking to this. So we know that a stakeholder engagement is not only in the law, and it's not only expected by our colleagues at NTIA, but it's also really practically important. We're going to get a lot of funding from the federal government for IIJA, as we did get a lot for ARPA. But what we know is that this funding, even with the funding that we're likely to receive from IIJA, is going to be insufficient to provide fiber to every resident in the state of Montana. We estimate that we're going to have about 50% as much money. So the first reason that stakeholder engagement is important, it's not only for some of the digital equity concepts discussed today, and I am going to refer to digital equity more specifically later, but it's also because we have scarce resources. And applying those scarce resources in a way that is equitable and that recognizes the greatest need really requires thorough stakeholder engagement, so that the state of Montana can come up with a plan that deploys that best given our specific situation in Montana. So we need stakeholder engagement to help us make tough decisions. Not only because stakeholder engagement is required by the NTIA, but also in the legislation, and not only because it helps us to make better decisions about digital equity and investments, but also because we have scarce resources as it relates to developing physical infrastructure and access. So this is what I don't really need to go over again. I think our colleagues from NTIA did it better than I did. We have, I'll just say it quickly, the lion's share of the money that we've been discussing in our in these programs is BEAD, which provides $42 billion across the country for infrastructure development. We also have Middle Mile, the tribal program, but the Digital Equity Act is really what has been discussed. These are the three different funding sources. Again, my colleagues at NTIA have really already discussed this, but I do think that the law is quite smart, well written, that it not only provides us with requirements, but it also funds the fulfillment of those requirements, especially starting with the State Digital Equity Act Planning Grant. So some of the engagement and stakeholder engagement and outreach that Montana is doing through me and through others is also being funded by the legislation itself. So we need input. And what I'd like to remind us is that the state of Montana is issuing or submitting a 5-year action plan. According to the Department of Administration, the 5-year action plan, which is due in the springtime, is intended not only to cover the state's plan for deploying BEAD money, but also for the Digital Equity Act approach. And so the Department of Administration and the state of Montana is commissioning, and we're in the middle of it right now, of a statewide outreach and stakeholder engagement plan specifically to support the 5-year action plan, which is thinking not only about BEAD, but it's also thinking about digital equity at the same time. So we are essentially melding or combining that stakeholder engagement and outreach so that we can have a unified understanding that will be fed into the 5-year action plan, which will be submitted to the Department of Commerce in order to satisfy what's needed to draw down those funds in a thoughtful way. So how are we, the state of Montana, engaging in stakeholder engagement? There is a multi-level approach. The first is the state of Montana has engaged in a statewide survey. That survey was open for about 8 to 10 weeks. It closed only last week. We had a very strong response. Those responses are being tabulated now. And so the statewide survey is the foundation of this first level of stakeholder engagement and outreach. The next is we did a statewide tour in 7 locations a few weeks ago. Many of you got to meet with us, and I had such a great time driving across the state of Montana, 6 different cities, 7 different outreach sessions. We had scheduled 42 different listening sessions broken out by specific breakout groups. I won't go over the cities that we did, but well, actually I could. We started off in Glendive and then went to Glasgow, Billings, Great Falls, and also Whitefish there, Kalispell actually. And so, and then we also had a tribal only engagement also in Great Falls. So we had 2 in one city, but we did in each one of those cities, we had a public session and then we had specific breakout groups. I will brag and boast a little bit about our library system. We had at least one librarian in every single public session. So I really want to thank Jenny for making sure that we had the voices of digital equity, especially in those public outreach sessions as voiced by the libraries. We're also having a number of one-on-one or say 1-on-3 or 1-on-4 listening sessions. Some of those have been in person. Many of those have been via a video link with community leaders who are helping these are categories that are specifically called out in NTIA's guidance to us. And so we have modeled those one-on-one sessions and those not the public sessions, but the one-on-one sessions and the breakout sessions around the guidance that we find from the NTIA. And then finally, we've had a number of one-on-one sessions privately with and we often get better and more candid answers when we can meet with leaders one-on-one and they can share with us what's on their mind. So this is the stakeholder engagement. Its complete purpose was limited to listening and gaining insight and information from various constituencies as called for in the legislation and by NTIA guidance. To get the word out, we engaged with these partners across Montana. I've listed their logos here. They help us to set up the invitations to come to these public outreach sessions and one-on-ones. And so these were the our Montana partners that help, other than the Department of Administration, obviously, to get the word out. So soon, and this has not yet been completely settled on, but in the next 10 weeks or so, we will be doing a second statewide tour where we will be engaging a second time with stakeholders, this time with more honed perspective of what the 5-year action plan is likely to be, to get feedback about some of those initial, I don't want to say decisions, but I would say the initial impulses in certain directions, and see how various constituencies are reacting and how they can help shape and mold those initial policy impulses that are making their way into the 5-year action plan. So we will be touring the state a second time in 8 to 10 weeks from now, and we are continuing to reach out and consult with tribal voices as well. So I think that covers the main intent for my comment, was to first be humbled by the ideal outreach guidance and plans from the Department of Commerce, and then to share with you what the state of Montana is actively doing in order to meet the intent and the guidance of the NTIA.
Thank you. Now, hopefully we have some time for some questions. And I saw one show up in the chat thus far, and that was, can NTIA confirm if Montana's planning grant application was approved?
No, we definitely cannot speak to that. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
Hi, this is Kate McMahon. Anthony, I met you at the session in Kalispell. I'm a planning
Hi, Kate.
consultant. Yeah, hi. Just for the folks from NTIA, I'm a planning consultant, but I'm on contract with the state library since last year initially to help with ARPA funds. And this year, the focus more on the digital equity funds. So I had a couple of questions, both for Anthony and for NTIA. And I guess my first question, Anthony, you mentioned the survey closed. And I know when you were in Kalispell, we talked about the possibility of maybe keeping that open a little bit longer to allow people and still promote it. And I went to the Connect Montana website today, and it looked like it is still open. Like if you wanted to take it, you could. I was at the League of Cities conference in Kalispell yesterday and was talking to some participants there about this, and they weren't aware of the survey. And I said, well, let me find out if it's still open and I'll email you the link. Can I still do that?
I guess the short answer is no. You could. I don't know if the responses will be included. So I want to be honest about that. Thanks for letting me know that the website has not been updated. I need to let somebody know that. Let me give you the thinking, and we did discuss leaving it open longer. My company, and we are a company, and that we are working hand in hand with the Department of Administration. We do a lot of things like this, and we do a lot of surveys and outreach. And one thing that we know about surveys is that you can watch it. I don't want to claim it's as fancy as a mathematical algorithm, but it's pretty much a mathematical algorithm. That survey responses have a hump when they're coming in, and they trail off, and they trickle, and they trickle, and they trickle. And pretty soon you're getting 1 or 2 or 3 a week. And there is a very small marginal return in leaving it open for an extra week. We're going to get an extra 2 or 3 responses. The reason that there's a reason to close it, because the planning team at the Department of Administration is putting together a plan, and they need the results, and the results have to be processed and they have to be cleaned. We have to look for duplicates and things of that nature. So there is a couple of weeks where we need to clean it up and prepare it. If the longer we hold it open, then the less time we have to employ what the data are telling us. And I don't want to speak for the Department of Administration. I'm careful not to do that. But I think Director Giles is pretty determined to have a rough draft of the state's plan ready before session in January, so that we can properly incorporate all views from our elected leadership, et cetera, et cetera. So there is not an unlimited amount of time before we really need to come up with a plan that reflects these inputs. The inputs that we got were for the size of Montana and for the size of our digital equity, what we expect from other states, that the survey response was fairly strong. I do think that if we mounted another marketing plan, we could have gotten those responses up a bit, but I don't think we're going to double the response rate or increase it by 50%. We might get a couple of hundred more, but anyway, that decision was made by the Department of Administration. I'm trying to share why they made it, but that's what they made. And we did stop tabulating data on last week.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, you know, you had a slide that showed all the stakeholder groups that you did outreach to.
Yes.
So when you tabulate the results and look at, you know, you see like, okay, yeah, we got really strong response from the chambers and economic development and libraries, but we really didn't hear too much from local governments or whatever.
Right.
You know, I mean, so you're tabulating it by stakeholder groups to see if there's any that are underrepresented, and then how are you going to
That's a
reach out
great
to those
question.
groups that were underrepresented in the survey, or in the public meetings for that matter?
Absolutely. So when you think about this, I'm going to use one of these wonky consultant words like toolbox. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox. The survey is an important tool. It's not the only tool. The in-person public sessions were an important tool, but they're not the only tool. The one-on-ones that we've had and the one-on-threes, you know, we have a fairly extensive meeting with the AARP coming up, you know, in a meeting. So we are doing all of the above in order to meet the different constituency groups that the Department of Commerce has highlighted as being important. When we go on the road, I'll be honest with you, and I won't call out any specific groups. Some groups we didn't encounter on the road or not enough of. Other groups, we had a strong, the county commissioners were at every single meeting, at least one, and we got a strong in-person response. Some other groups, not so much. So we've reached out to them in different ways. And of course, the survey. Now, when folks fill out a survey, it's up to them to identify their own status. Sometimes they don't do that, even when we ask them to. So I would say that if I just had to rely on the survey, I'd be missing something. But if I just had to rely on in-person, I'd be missing something. If I were just doing one-on-ones, I'd be missing something. But when you put them all together, I do think we're going to get a relevant, statistically relevant response from each and every one of our groups, because we've approached this in so many different ways as a backup, if you will.
Okay. And I don't mean to dominate if somebody else has a question, but I just made a list while we were talking. And this is for either NTIA or Anthony. I was just curious. What's the process? So when these plans are completed or in draft form or whatever, you mentioned, Anthony, that administration wanted to get this done before the legislative session. Is it required that the legislature adopt these plans? Or, I mean, what's the process for formal state adoption and submission? I just wasn't clear on that.
I just want to make sure that I'm not misspeaking. We're not going to have it finished before session. I think the Department of Administration wanted to do a lot of the work before session. So when asked by lawmakers, how's it coming, she can have a sense of where we're headed. It's not going to be finished by January 1st. And we're not I'd say I work for the department. So I do not believe the department is seeking any sort of ratification from the state legislature. I want to make sure I'm being very clear about that. I don't want to overstate that, but it's a great question, but it's maybe others could offer a response.
I'm not entirely sure that it's required. I believe that's on a state-by-state basis. I could be very wrong about that, but I believe that is the protocol.
So even after January 1st, there might still be opportunities for public engagement and input and refinement of the plan. I guess when you had said that the goal was to have it done by the legislature, that, okay, well, that's it, no more public engagement after that. And so I guess that was one of the questions I had, because it's such a short time frame that you're dealing with.
Right. I think there will be continuous engagement. Maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but we have front-loaded a series of in-person public meetings to kickstart.
Mm-hmm.
But just because we're not having in-person public meetings does not mean we're not engaging. You know, we had 6 meetings this week. And we haven't done public in-person engagement in almost a month. So it continues apace. I think that the characterization of that engagement will definitely change once insights are drawn and can be field tested, if you will. Right now, we're just asking, what do you think? At some point, we'll stop asking everybody, what do you think? And instead we'll start saying, how does this feel? Or what do you think about this, this draft or that kind of thing. So I do think the public engagement will shift over time. As it relates to in-person, like city by city, I don't know if there's a plan for that in the spring, but there might be.
Okay. And let me let other people ask questions, and then I'll come back to to my notes. Like I said, I don't want to be dominating this. Okay, well, I'll go on. So I do have a
Go ahead,
question.
Kate.
Yeah, for NTIA. I saw on one of your slides that one of the components of the DEA plans was an inventory of strategies in the state. Is that correct? And I was curious what that meant. Is that trying to compile existing broadband plans? Is it asking libraries and local governments, what are your strategies? I guess my background is I'm a city planner, so I work on other types of plans, like growth policies, which are comprehensive plans, economic development strategies, and they have embedded in them, strategies regarding broadband, although they're not broadband plans. And so I was wondering, are there those things that we should be looking at to say, well, because not many communities in Montana actually have a broadband plan. It's you can probably count on one hand how many local governments would have that. But all the counties in the state have growth policies, and there are economic development plans that cover most counties. And like I said, embedded within those documents are broadband strategies. So I was wondering how you would integrate the strategies from these other planning documents, because Montana, just sort of the way our state is set up, is we don't have individual broadband plans.
Yeah, and I believe that's the case in a lot of other states too, from what I've seen. But that section, I believe what you're referring to is the asset mapping aspect of the plan. The notice of funding opportunity requires that states in their plan take what we're calling an asset inventory of digital equity programs that are going on across the state. That can be publicly funded or privately funded. And that's really just to get an idea of what the state is already doing around digital equity, so that they can, better focus their resources once the capacity money comes. So whether that exists out there or not, we're asking states to find out what is out there. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and so the library, I think Jenny's presentation at the very beginning sort of is a good representation of what the libraries are doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it would be, I guess, asking the other stakeholder groups what they're doing as well. It's sort of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. To see where the lines are already crossing over, who's already being covered and who's not being covered, and yeah.
And I guess the final, I'm looking at my notes. Another question I had is, and you mentioned that, again, this is for NTIA, that, you continue to hold webinars and internetforall.gov website. Would that have like best practices then from other states on their, community engagement, stakeholder involvement, various strategies, that other states, and because to me, it seems like there needs to be, from the meetings I attended and the conversations I've been having with people, and then plus past work that I've done, because I have done a lot of broadband planning over my 20 years plus as a consultant, that there needs to be an education component. So when you ask the county commissioner, well, what kind of digital equity efforts do you think the state should engage in? It's sort of, their response is sort of limited because they're not really aware of, what they can do. and how this might apply. And
Mhm.
so I'm wondering, as we're doing these planning and we're asking those questions, what are some best practices to maybe, get, like you're saying, meaningful responses from them, rather than them just, and again, I can tell you when I was at the League of Cities conference yesterday and at lunch and having conversations with the cities, and I mentioned this as a, I was working on this program, and they're like, oh, well, our provider is bringing fiber to City Hall, so we're taken care of. And I'm like, well, what do you do once the fiber gets to City Hall? What are you going to do with that capacity?
Mhm.
And I started asking them, questions, are you going to upgrade your websites? Are you going to upgrade internal wiring? How are you going to reach out to community members? And that question hadn't even occurred to them.
Mhm.
So how do you get that education component into this planning process so that you can get maybe more meaningful responses? I mean, what has your experience been with that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. We do have, I think, very good resources for that sort of thing. I totally agree. Like, it's very important to collect those sort of best practices across state lines and between localities and everything. And we have been compiling a lot of that already on our website, and I'm happy to share the link with you here. There's one more that I'm trying to find that I don't remember where it is on our site, but we have there's a map where you can go on and click on every state, and you can see each state's resources, and we have a lot of localities on there now as well, to see what they're doing around this stuff. Because you're right, like, and I've talked to a lot of localities too. They're all doing very different things, and I think it's very important that people connect and people take a look at what's going on in other states, because I've heard some people have this one problem and other people have a solution to that problem, and all we need to do is connect them. And so we have those, and I put them in the chat. I
Yeah.
know that NDIA has good stuff as well. I'm gonna try to find that map for you.
Yeah, but that kind of education for community leaders be an appropriate strategy for the digital equity plan?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
With that kind of education, for community leaders, because like I say, if we, with this time frame that we have, they may not be aware of everything that they can do, but as this process goes on for the next 5 years, to maybe do more education, so that they can be more creative and think about how can they use, is that a strategy that can be incorporated into the digital equity plans?
Absolutely. So what we are also working on is creating a framework for guidance and technical assistance. So each state has been assigned a federal program officer who we are currently working to develop, like you said, those educational components, because we recognize that not everyone may have a full understanding of what digital equity is and what that entails. And so we want to make sure we're doing our due diligence as a department to not only inform our constituents, but making sure that when they're engaging with the state or with the broadband office or other stakeholders, that through and through, we are all being in alignment what it is and what that should look like in practice. So in short, we will have guidance on what that looks like and what are some of the best practices for informing some of the constituents that they're working with.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question for Anthony. And this is just, since you went around the state and you conducted these meetings and have actually been sort of probably looked at some preliminary results, what have your impressions been? What are some key things that you heard in Montana? I'm just, yeah, and I know that's, you probably heard a lot, but where there are a few things that you would say, here's what some preliminary insights that I have based on the meetings that we conducted around the state.
Yes. I want to be really, really careful because it is my job to compile a report and give it to the Department of Administration. And I haven't done that yet. So I was tempted, Kate, to say, I'm really not at liberty to say, but that sounds like such a bureaucratic response. I'll give you my personal impressions rather than any sort of summary. First of all, my personal impressions are there is a fairly wide gap in perceptions between, I'll tell you a quick anecdote. When I talk to ISPs, they're frustrated because they believe that there are territories within the regions that they already serve that are being declared as not being served, and therefore they're concerned about government capital coming in to create competition for them, and they're frustrated because they've devoted their lives, they devoted their careers and their capital into building out infrastructure, and then they feel as if there's a threat that government funding may come in and encroach upon that. And that's a valid concern that we need to listen to. And then 5 minutes later, I will be with a citizen group, and the citizen group will say, the ISP claim that they're serving us, but they're not serving us at all. We actually have no service in this area. And so there is a wide disconnect about who has service, who doesn't have service. This is why the question of maps are so incredibly important. And I don't know that if we had a million years, we could never come up with a map that was perfect. But I do think that I think mapping is going to be important. I also think that we have different attitudes about deploying capital for areas that would never get service in a market environment, not in a million years, and how that should be prioritized versus, but that has a low number of covered folks versus folks that are closer to town, if you will, and limited amounts of capital could cover a higher number of people, even though both. So that's a dynamic I've heard. I've also heard, just off the top of my head, and I won't say any more than this because I want to make sure that my report is not prejudged, but when I discuss digital equity, the number one challenge that I am hearing is affordability rather than literacy or access to a device, for example. Affordability, when I try to remove the concept of access, like infrastructure access to broadband, and I just literally ask about equity, then it comes down to affordability. And finally, I'll say I hear very different perspectives in tribal areas than I do in the rest of the state, which I guess is no surprise. So those are some quick anecdotes. I'll call them anecdotes, personal reflections.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Those are my questions. Again, I didn't mean to bombard you, but this is a topic a lot of interest in.
Great questions, Kate.
Yeah, that was great. Those were really good questions, and I want to thank you for asking them. And I also want to highlight again that we have an email hotline. If anyone else has any more questions, I'll put it here in the chat. So please send any other questions that you have to that email. Any questions that we don't get here today. And they're really prompt, and they're good. They're responsive, so they should be able to help you out.
Last call for questions from anyone but Kate. Well, actually, if Kate has any more, she can do it too, but it was good to have you asking questions since everyone else seems to be a little shy. Okay.
Well, it's not often that I get such great resources on a web call that I can just, so I appreciate everybody's expertise, your participation in the call, and your willingness to have this discussion. Like I said, I wasn't sure if I'd have this opportunity again, so I wanted to take advantage. Thank you all for being here.
Okay, then to wrap it up. I'll just give you quickly what our next steps are. this is being recorded, and so we will post it to the Montana State Library YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it again or refer to anyone else, and we'll be letting everyone else know about the recording. And then a brief plug, if you want to stay up to date on digital equity, what the state library is involved with, and the updates we have to give you, please visit our news page and sign up for email newsletter updates on any of a range of topics that might interest you, and give you the address there. You can also find it by going to our webpage and clicking on About and then News. And at that point, and also I'll add in those links that Brett provided onto the YouTube page so that people joining in later, because I know it's always a little frustrating if you're watching a webinar later and it's like, oh, I would have loved to have looked at that. Where is that link? So I'll add those in so people later can find them there. At this point, we'll stop the recording. And I'll stop my screen share and give you a last chance if anyone has any last words or questions that they didn't want recorded. If not, I want to thank everyone, especially our panelists who took time out of your days to join us and responded to my frantic emails on occasion, like Anthony. I was like, so who's actually going to be there? So glad that you could all join us, and sure some of you I'll be seeing and talking with later. So
Good to see you all. Thank you.
Thanks
have
so
a good
much.
Bye-bye.
weekend.
Have a
Bye-bye.
nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.